All right, illustrations and sources. If somebody would get Matthew 13, 44 through 51, Glenn. And then Eric, if you'll get 1 Timothy 4, 13 through 16. Spurgeon said that illustrations are like windows, and they will let light into the room of your sermon. How many of you ever preached a sermon and it was the story that the people remembered? And so that can annoy you, but in reality it shouldn't, because that's the way people are wired. Jesus used this strategy a lot. Matthew 13, 44 through 51.
Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a treasure hid in the field, that which when a man had found he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he had, and buyeth that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking godly pearls, who when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which when it was full, they drew it to the shore and sat down, gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So shall it be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just. I'm sorry, which verse did you say? 51. And shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Jesus saith unto them, Have ye understood all these things? And they said unto him, Yea, Lord.
So I'm not going to expound on these parables, but I want you to see that here's a succession of illustrations. The kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like. The point being that Jesus used illustrations a lot. He used word pictures, okay? And then 1 Timothy 4, 13 through 16, Eric.
Till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. Neglect not the gift that is in thee, which was given thee by the prophecy, with the laying on of hands by the presbytery. Meditate upon these things, give thyself wholly to them, that thy profiting may appear to all. Take heed unto thyself and unto thy doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee.
So give attention, he says, in King James at least, to reading. He's exhorting Timothy to be a student, to pay attention to doctrine. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about inspirational sources for our sermons. We're going to talk about illustrations, and I just have, just a bit of a hodgepodge of thoughts that I want to leave you with and keep it open for discussion. Illustrations are one of my favorite parts of a sermon. My favorite preachers are good illustrators. Oftentimes it's what is the nail that the sermon's hung on that people remember. They'll say, man, I remember that illustration years later. And like Spurgeon said, that it's like a room with the proper amount of windows that lets light in. Now, I don't want a room that's all windows, and I don't like a room without any windows. So this is also proportionate. There's a right proportion of illustrations. Let's just talk about that. Let's talk about the value of this. One of the things that an illustration can do, it can be a tension release. If you know anything about music, music has to have tension release. It can't all be just distortion, and I guess there's some bands that are like that, but they're annoying. These songs and composition, they have a crescendo, and they have the climax, and they have the refrain, and that's the way a sermon ought to be. And an illustration or a story, it can be a shifting of gears. It can be, humor is very profitable in that it is a tension release. It causes people to open their heart. There's something about humor where people just relax, they open their heart, and then bam, you fire in a shot. By the time they close the door, it's too late. It's ricocheting. And so all these things are part of a good sermon. But then again, you don't want to be a clown. It's not like you're just a Christian comedian. And it can be overdone. And there has to be a soberness and a gravity to the Word of God. One guy said, growing up, I always admired Bozo the Clown, but I was glad he wasn't my dad. So there's a balance, right? You have to be aware of that. On that note, if you're going to use humor, there is an art to telling a joke. And like I said yesterday, there's timing. If you listen to comedians, they'll say it's all about the timing. I don't know if you've ever stopped to try to understand that. But somebody that's telling a joke, like I described yesterday, it's almost like there's a cadence to the story. And when it comes to the punchline, there's that, and that's what tips people over the edge. And there's an ability to do that. And I've seen guys that are good at that. And then I've seen guys that are not good at that. I've seen preachers tell the exact same story that somebody else hit it out of the park with and just flub it because the timing wasn't there. Just the delivery was off. So you would do well to study delivery a little bit. I mentioned also yesterday that somehow I'd gotten hold of a tape of Bill Cosby years and years ago. I think it was called Himself. And it was really just like 90 minutes of Bill Cosby on a stage, no props. He had a chair and a colored curtain behind him, and he was just telling stories, and it was absolutely hilarious. It is genius. It is comic genius. And the thing I like about him is he's clean. I don't know if you guys know who he is. I remember really picking up some things watching that there are ways to hold a crowd. There's ways to connect. And again, it's not all a big joke fest. It's not Comedy Central. But it does help because it brings a tension release many times in the sermon. It's a great strategy. Walt Disney said, what was Walt Disney's instructions? Does anybody remember? Make them laugh and make them cry. And he built an empire on that principle. And you look at the Walt Disney, the old ones before the queers got a hold of Walt Disney, which is an amazing thing to ponder. But the old school Walt Disney classics, he used that. Make them laugh and make them cry. And made millions of dollars because people like that. People like to be moved emotionally. So emotions are part of our human makeup. And if you go too far to one end, you become, it's almost soulish. It's not based on God's truth. But do you guys remember Star Trek? You know, Dr. Spock wouldn't be a good pastor. You know, he just doesn't connect. He's just devoid of human emotion and prides himself in it.
Because I believe some guys actually think that Mr. Spock is a good role model as a pastor. There's this feeling, you know, everything is logic, reason, theology.
Yeah, that doesn't work with most humans. So there's a human side to this, and part of your equipment as a communicator is understanding human emotion, and that you can tap into that, and that has deep veins into the will. This isn't manipulation, it's just understanding human nature, and that you can use illustration, you can use the tearjerker stories, you can use the humorous stories, poems, and these are all things that are intended to drive the nail in. Having said that, again, you want to avoid long illustrations where you have to read them. And there's stories many times that I'll come across, and I'll know that that's way too big. It's a great story, but it's too big. It's cumbersome. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to erase the lines that don't matter. I'm going to bring it together. I'm going to change this word. I'm going to switch this around for this culture. Try to bring it down, and then I want to get it to where I can tell the story like this and not be reading it. You know, there was a pastor. You want to be a storyteller, and that's where trigger notes come in. The outlines that I gave you are trigger note outlines, meaning that at a glance you ought to be able to be in your discourse, glancing at your notes without being there reading it, because that's where you disconnect from people. So the same thing with an illustration. You ought to master it a little bit to where you can tell the story and at a glance remember the punchline or remember important phrasing. And poems are good if you can get the cadence of the poem, right? If you can't, I'll just bail out on it because some poems don't rhyme. I mean, you know, some poems are good and some poems are like, what? Like progressive jazz. It doesn't make any sense. But if you're going to tell a poem, you know, make sure you got the cadence of the poem. Practice it. I'll practice it in my office. And if I'm comfortable with it, then I'll use it. If I'm not, I won't. But they can be very powerful. A poem can be very, very powerful. Let's talk about sources, both for sermon illustration and and sermon inspiration. You have to be a reader. You have to work at this. For illustrations, books. I was looking for some of my illustration books this morning. I'm just still unpacking and moving in, but before the internet and before email, it was all about books. And so I have one book, it's this thick. It's called 7,700 Illustrations. And you guys may already have that. That made its rounds. Before that, it was Knight's and Knight's Master Book of Illustrations. And I still have those. I don't always use them, but every now and then I'll go open up old Knight and see if there's something in there that I missed the first decade around, or reuse one. I have my favorites. I have stories that are just classics, and I try not to overuse them. Perhaps sometimes maybe I do, but they're just arrows in the quiver. Over the years, I've subscribed to various periodicals. This is a completely secular management, public speaking type periodical. It's called Bits and Pieces. Sometimes the secular ones are better. I've found that too many of the Christian ones are just inane. And you can get good stuff out of them, but sometimes you get a good professional, corporate, public speaking illustration source, and they know how to not be risque and dirty, but they tell these motivational stories. And that's one I've used for years. I don't get them in the mail anymore, but this was one that I had in my stack of stuff that I had not opened yet. So what will happen is I'll get 5 months of these will pile up, and then on a certain day in my schedule, I have a study schedule. When I'm ahead of the game, I'll pull it out, I'll start reading it, I get my highlighter, I highlight the ones that are good, and then I put it down, and then at another point, I'll go through and process them, and what that means is I tear out the page that's good and throw the rest away. What I want to say is I work very hard on illustrations. It is a major part of my study time. And it's something that if you're going to want to use them, you're going to have to invest time in compiling and being able to find them. That's the other thing, is that I've got piles of illustrations, man. I've got files, and I have an entire file cabinet file with lettered illustration divisions. And some of those haven't seen the light of day in years. I mean, I put them in there. But I got stuff all over the place. I've got on my hard drive under sermons, as I open that up, I have all my sermons subject file, but then I have a smattering of illustrations that are on that page. And then I have a file that says illustrations, and I open that up, and there's hundreds more. And then inside of that are files that are on morals, politics. Over the years, I just put together illustrations, and when that part of my sermon comes, I just know where to go to look for them. I may not be as organized as other men, because these things are kind of all over the place. But I'm probably more organized than many. But you have to find some system to discover, file, and retrieve an illustration. Because as I'll be putting the sermon together, I'll go, man, I remember an article. Where is it? The hunt is on. So I'm going through, and there I find it. There's the gem. In newspapers, if you read newspapers, tear it out, put it in a pile somewhere. You can Google search now. It's a fascinating tool where you can Google search poems, articles. You can even think there's got to be a news story out there about somebody who's, let a piano get away from him and it rolled down the road. Piano rolled away and caused damage. And you Google that, and bam, there's somebody in Taiwan that happened to, and it's hilarious. You got to sniff this stuff out. That's kind of a new tool. There are programs you can buy. You can subscribe to illustration programs. You can get them on your computer. I have one that is linked to Parables, etc. Has anybody ever heard of that? Parables, etc. It's an old sermon illustration source that I had subscribed to years ago, and here are my Parables, etc. This is ancient. This is ancient right here. But in a pinch, man, I'll go through this because I know at one time I invested time into that. So, you go through, you see if it's still funny. You see if it still makes any sense to you, if it applies. But I also, at one point, bought a disc that they put out, and I put that on my computer, and it has a search engine by topic. Well, I'll click it on there, and I type in authority. bam, comes up with 3,000 on authority, and I'll just sit there and read through them. If I like one, I copy paste it over to a blank page in my word processor, and then when I get 10 of them, I'm done. I'm ready to print out those 10. Okay, this goes here, the other ones I throw them away, I use them another day. What I'm trying to say is that personally for me is a major part of my sermon preparation.
Sorry, do you think it's worth subscribing to illustration?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Find them, do it. Yep. Because if you're going to have the appropriate illustration, you're going to have sources. Ask other guys what they do. So you want to make your illustration appropriate, avoid the risque or incendiary, and avoid illustrations that just would violate pulpit etiquette. There is a such thing as pulpit etiquette. There are certain words that you can use in conversation that you'd want to avoid in the pulpit. All right. On the page that I gave you, sermon workshop overview down at the bottom, one of the things that helped me in my journey that I didn't mention in former sessions is I began to read other great preachers. And it became kind of a trend at some point in the American arm of the fellowship. I don't know if it did here. The old preachers, Chappell, Morrison, and other favorites. Again, that can be overdone. It's not like you want to be preaching other people's sermons, but I think it's really helpful. I know it helped me to read these guys and how they took apart a text, how they put thoughts together. In that period, it was when I was in Farmington, somebody turned me on to Paul W. Powell. Paul W. Powell is a Baptist man. At the time, I think when I started reading his books, he was still in the ministry, but he's retired now. And man, those books really helped me because some of these guys, they have tapped into an academic way of thinking that we could benefit from. So as I began to read these men and realize that I can benefit from their academic prowess, I dialed into this guy, Paul W. Powell, and I absolutely love his books. Not every one of them is good, but many of them are good. Every chapter was 3 points with illustrations. And what it helped me to do is I saw how this man textually extracted truth from a body of Scripture and made it into a sermon. So you can't be too proud to do that. Another thing that I recommend guys do is get Pastor Mitchell's Adult Bible Hour. And when I was a young pastor, it really helped me because it kept me fed, listening to him and how he deals with his church and how he says things and the revelation, the pure revelation. And it was an incredible resource for me when it came time for me to teach. I remember mentioning that down the road to a young pastor, and he arced up on me like, oh, well, I do my own. Well, I said, well, good, you do your own. That you have to believe that your people need more than what you have. You can go to the extreme where we hear preaching against pulling a sermon off the internet and preaching it. Well, that's wrong. That's not wise. You're not feeding the people. You have to internalize this, and you have to channel it through your character and your personality. That's what's powerful about ministry. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with, and it's absolutely advisable that you find resources beyond yourself. This is why we read commentators, isn't it? It's not that I believe everything Adam Clark believes, but he has incredible insight that I don't have. These men spent the better part of their lives studying things, and we can benefit from that. So then another thing to do is call your friends and sermonize with them. Go to coffee, do it over the phone, bounce thoughts off them. Wherever I've been, I've found men that want to do that and can do that. So read, study, read, and study and read, and schedule your week, especially if you're working. If you're a working pastor, God love you. You ought to be believing God to not be a working pastor forever, because that's not the will of God. It's a temporary thing. That even as you go full time, I have a schedule that I keep. And it's not ironclad, but, you know, I have a schedule. Monday, certain things are done, and Thursdays. These are the lighter days. Tuesday and Wednesday, Friday and Saturday are serious office days. And I have a goal that I want to get back to my office on Tuesday at a certain time, and I want to be in there till a certain time, and by the time I leave, I want certain things done. And then Wednesday, I clear the slate. I schedule nothing on Wednesday. I don't schedule counseling if I can help it. I don't go to town. I don't do dentist appointments. I leave that totally open so I can get in my office and finish my sermon. Sometimes it takes me to 3:30 in the afternoon, even having worked on Tuesday. Other times I'm done at 10. But I just leave Wednesday open. So Tuesday and Wednesday, Friday and Saturday, this is what I do. Now, if you're pioneering and you're at the point where you're leading the Saturday outreach, then you're going to have to factor that in. But there's also nothing wrong with coming to the point in your ministry where you release that to your disciple. Pastor Mitchell did not lead the Saturday outreach in Prescott. But he did make sure that he was on corporate outreaches and he was witnessing. I remember seeing my pastor witness. So I stopped years ago putting together Sunday night sermon on Sunday afternoon. It's been years, and thank God when you have an assistant that can preach Sunday night. But prior to that, even before I had an assistant, I got to where I wanted to be done with both my sermons before Sunday morning. Because Sunday is, I really need to go out to eat, take a nap, get up, get my head back in the game, and not be freaking out and pounding on the printer because it won't work, you know. And all the things that happen when you're not prepared.
Do you work at night during the weeks? If you're working in the day, do you work at night?
Yeah, you're talking about working a job?
No, if you're getting stuff together for Sunday, Wednesdays and Sundays, you work in the evening as well?
Well, my office is at home, and I like that because then I can go and work whenever I want. That's just my preference. That affords me great latitude. I like to get up early in the morning, and I get a lot done in that 90 minutes before prayer. And then, depending on the day of the week, I'll either go out to breakfast or I'll not. I have to find time to get back to my office before the tyranny of the urgent begins to descend on me. Pastor Mitchell said, I don't resent the phone. I remember when the phone never rang. He said, there was a time nobody ever called me. So he says, that's revival when that phone rings. So you just got to do what you got to do, but you have to structure your life to get it done. You know, I like it when I can sit down Tuesday and by 11:30, man, I've got my 3 points, my jokes, my illustrations. Man, I'm happening. I'm ahead of the curve. But there's some times that I get out of my office on Tuesday, I'm like, what did I get done? And now I know I'm behind the curve on Wednesday. I got to get in there, and I got to just get to work.
While I was pastoring and pioneering, a lot of times I would get Pastor Mitchell's adult Bible hours and that from America and sit over and listen to them. By the end of, by Tuesday night, I was so inspired and constantly keeping myself full while I was driving and playing.
Yeah. And that's true if you're working. If you can get a resource like that, you'll not only teach that adult Bible hour, you'll have 4 sermon thoughts. So let's talk about that then. So I have my illustration file here. I have on my desk sermon ideas. These are just chicken scratch thoughts that God only knows when and where I was or how this happened, but they're there. And it's funny, as I'm looking around, I had another one, sermon ideas. It wasn't far from this one. It's in the same rack. This is, I made this file this morning. This was a pile of stuff that's in an open file, a 3-tiered open file that Pastor Mitchell left me when I came. And I've just been throwing articles in there. I've got one in here that Paul gave me about John Lennon's toilet. Did you give me that one? They auctioned off John Lennon's toilet seat. So he gave me that. I threw that in there. I don't know when I'll use that or if ever. What is this? Sydney. Okay, I was at conference and somebody used an illustration. The oldest grass courts in Australia, their tennis, called Garden Island. The caretaker, they got a new caretaker in, and of his own volition, he removed all the grass, put concrete down and AstroTurf. Just an ambitious man. Yeah, he's a gardener. He just said, I got an idea. Well, no, he thought, this is a brilliant idea. Why are we wasting all this time and money watering and cutting when I could just... All right, well, so there's a place for AstroTurf, but not in the oldest grass courts in Australia. So I'm going to find a place to use that. So that's just in a stack of stuff that I was in conference. Somebody used that or somebody mentioned that in fellowship. And I just wrote it down on this piece of paper and stuck it in my Bible and threw it on my stack of stuff. Someday when I'm putting a sermon together, I'll come across this and go, ah. So what is this? Isaac Newton was quoted as saying, the day will come when the volume of knowledge will be so increased that man will be able to travel at the speeds of up to 50 miles an hour. Isaac Newton was a Christian. He read Daniel, and it said, knowledge will increase and men will travel to and fro. So he made this incredible statement. In his day, that would have been nosebleed material. So the day will come when the volume of knowledge will be so increased that man will be able to travel at speeds of up to 50 miles an hour. In response, his contemporary Voltaire mocked him and cast ridicule on Newton and the Bible. That's brilliant. What do we got here? We got articles. You know, so this is just a stack of stuff, okay? And when it comes time for illustrations, I know that's there. I know that on my hard drive in 2 different places are internet articles that I've copied and pasted. There's lots of places that I go.
You use a lot of your own personal life stories as well.
I do, yeah. I mean, some of the best illustrations are your own family. You got to get permission sometimes. Your own life, your own failures, your own experiences. So yeah, you see things in life. Somebody mentioned a bumper sticker last night that they saw or something on the road. Write it down. It's just all preachable. So
I was just thinking, I think one of the things of being, you know, for years that I worked a job and pastored, you know, even churches into 60 people, 70 people, but still worked, if not part-time. I think it's a mindset that you've got to understand that when Sundays finish, Wednesday's coming in. And when Wednesday's finish, Sunday's coming
That's
in.
right.
There's always there's this tension that's always there. And so it's like you need to embrace like a mindset that, you know what, I need to be gathering all the time.
Yep.
And like the guys are driving trucks and doing stuff. Even when they're just working on the job, if something that happened with a forklift or something like that, it would inspire because it wasn't because, oh, that was a great idea. It's because I had no other.
that's right.
And so it's like you've got to be like a gatherer of information. And I feel a lot of guys, it's like, it's Wednesday morning, I've got to preach tonight. And it's like a mindset. And that is the joy when you do go full time, your mind is released to be able to grasp everything. You've got time to read a lot more. You've time to embrace things from the Bible. That was another question too with adult Bible hours. How many people do you think you should run before you start adult Bible hours? I went for a guy one day, like 60, 70 people, and he had no adult Bible hour. And I said, why not? He goes, oh, too much like hard work.
Well, that's the problem. Yeah, I've had that asked before, and I don't know. When I pioneered twice, I had adult Bible hour right away. That was me. I like it. I like adult Bible hour. There's something about teaching that is different than preaching, and I enjoy it, and I've always been able to gather a small group of people. So I did it right away, personally.
Were you working as well as pioneering?
The first assignment in Vegas, I did not work. I probably should have, but we were toughing it out. So no. The second one, I was on support for a year, and then I got a job, so it was both. So I would say both times I had the advantage of a period of time of being full-time, so that matters as well. So I wouldn't assign a pioneer guy to definitely do that if the conditions weren't correct. I would say by the time you have 60 people, my goodness, of course you should have adult Bible hour. You know, if you could draw 12 people on Sunday morning, I'd do an adult Bible hour, personally.
I believe it's the key to actually building your church.
Yeah, because you can say things in that time. And that's what I picked up from Pastor Mitchell, was that he said and did things in the adult Bible hour that were unique to that forum. And you can lay a foundation there. So I would say the sooner the better, but it'd probably be a case-by-case basis.
just another factor is that in that too, I don't know, maybe it's a cop-out, but it's your level of experience as a minister. I mean, I've had just putting three sermons together it's a major plus working part-time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just think that's another factor. You've also...
If you've got a pioneer pastor that's working full-time and he's just got a handful of people, he may be off the hook. But at some point, it can't be about laziness. It can't be about, it's almost like work, like what this guy said. This is what I want to do. I want to be a pastor. And so that's going to be my passion. And if you've got a group of people that would benefit from it, then if you're short on time, then get a Pastor Mitchell Adult Bible Hour and spend the time to work them up. There's other things you can do. Like right now, I'm in between studies and I'm doing this reliability of Scripture and the historical reliability of Christ. It's largely DVDs. And there's times I will time these kind of things when I'm against it, when my back's to the wall and I don't have the time to put together the principles of prayer. I like that forum and I think it's valuable. So, all right, let's take a break. We want to put some sermons together, so let's take a break, get a coffee, and then we'll come back together in a few minutes.